Welcome, everyone, to our last Friday Create a World episode for 2022. I'm Janice
Hold on just a
Creneti.
minute. It didn't take. I don't know what happened. I'm gonna have to start it again. Hold on. Sorry, everybody. It must be on. I just can't find it.
I did see a message saying that live streaming was on. So,
All right, we'll go right ahead, everybody. So,
okay.
Tantra error.
So again, welcome everyone to our final Create a World episode for 2022. I am Janice Creneti, and I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning. And I have my good friend Barbara George with us, and we're going to have a conversation with you about two different programs that we've both been working with. One's called the Newfield Network, and one is called Positive Intelligence. And we're gonna share some ideas from our exploration and some ways that this is really feeding us in our life. I just want to remind everybody that's joined us that our purpose for Create a World is to give you a place to find some stabilization while the world's kind of going mad. We know that so many things that we've known to be stable and fixed are starting to fall apart around us. While that can be a little scary, it's ultimately a good thing, because chances are, if you're here, you probably would like to see a world that's sort of different than the one that you were born into and raised in, a world that's more expansive and more inclusive. And so while these structures and organizations and institutions fail around us, we have to be able to get our feet back under us, because we're gonna stumble, we're gonna fall, we're gonna need to get our feet back under us. We're gonna stumble and fall again. We're gonna need to get our feet back under us. That's where we are for the next little bit of time. And so the purpose of Create a World is really to for you all to be able to build a toolkit of different ways that you can get your feet back under you. And of course, you know that different things speak to different people. And so that's why we have lots of different folks and lots of different conversations across Create a World, so that you can connect with something that is powerful and important for you. So welcome, and welcome, Barbara. Anything you want to say about yourself, Barbara, real quickly before we dive into our conversation?
Sure. My name is Barbara George. I met Tantra in 1994. That was a long time ago. And there's been some breaks in where I didn't follow, but most of the time I would say, yes, we've been together. So I've known her a long time. I am happy to be with you today. Because Newfield Network and Positive Intelligence, which we may refer to as PQ, have changed so much for me. I'm very thrilled.
Thanks. So we thought we would start our conversation today by just sort of giving a brief synopsis of what Newfield is and what PQ is. And Barbara, feel free to start with one or the other, and I'll chime in as I'm so moved.
So I'm going to start with Newfield, because that was the first one I took, and it's actually coach training. But I must say that if I never coached, it would still be worth every moment. There are so many things that came from that, such as they talk about body dispositions, like being stable or flexible or resolute. That gave a nice label to see where the body actually is and where it might be appropriate. Also, they had something they called a Bell model, body, emotion, and language. It's all of them. I am so brain oriented and truthfully was sort of born that way, because my mother used to say to me, why do you have to be so logical? But nonetheless, it really opened up seeing and believing that I could be all of it, not just, and making it comfortable for me to be all of it.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I've often described Newfield to people as human being 101. because I feel like what it did for me was remind me of the fullness of the spectrum of the human experience. And both Barbara and I come from science backgrounds, technical backgrounds, and so we both have definitely, especially through education, been trained to be very much up in the noggin here. And the idea in Newfield is that you really do need to bring in all of the wisdom of the body and all of the wisdom of your emotional palette. And I know emotion in particular, as a scientist, that I was trained to think of that as verboten and no, no, no. And yet I've always been a person who experienced very strong emotions and always recognized that they were an important part of the information I gathered about life on this planet. And so it was really great for me to see Newfield say, no, we embrace it all. It's, it's all part of the system of being a human being.
And I think on the PQ side, it just gave it was like freedom to act. It was, I've always been empathic. So, I felt things or picked other people's stuff up or whatever, but it was so suppressed. Once I got to positive intelligence, it was like, wow, I can open up. The other thing about it talks about the sage, the wise part of you, the saboteur, all of those ego-based judgment and things. And then you have the ability to move from one to the other at your command. And one of the great things about that program is like 2 minutes, 3 times a day, gives you a little reminder. And they have some very specific exercises that you can do, which I like. It's nice to have something practical to do rather than, just it all being more esoteric.
Yeah, and that's also what was really powerful for me. So so in this positive intelligence system, this PQ system, it's the idea that that again, as human beings, we have this full spectrum of experience, right? And so we have parts of us that that are not life enhancing. They would call them the saboteurs, the parts of us that make ourselves, beat ourselves up for, oh gosh, I said the wrong thing, or I did the wrong thing, or I didn't act fast enough, or we judge ourselves, we judge others, we judge situations. And that, which is also very much a reality of separation, right? The idea that something is right or wrong, it's good or bad, that duality. And recognizing that you're always, that as a human being, you're always going to experience that. You just are. That's part of the nature of being a human being. But you don't have to hang out there. You don't have to marinate there. There's another aspect of you, the sage, the wise self, the higher self. You probably have lots of different ways that you describe it for yourself, but it's this idea that is the part of us that is life enhancing. That is the part of us that is able to live in ease and flow and connection to other people. It's where I would argue, where we find our joy, and that we can shift from one to another. And so this program that Barbara's talking about, this app that you have on your phone, is these very quick little activities that help you make the shift from the saboteur to the sage. And PQ has been very profound for me because I think it's because of all my science training. I appreciate theory, but I always want to be able to bring it into the concrete. And to me, the PQ system really bridged a lot of what I learned in Newfield about the nature of being human into sort of the practical everyday reality of how I can be more at choice about the way that I'm being. And I can't say enough about both programs. So
one of the things that as Janice said, that he emphasizes is that we're perfectly imperfect. No one is perfect, even though perfection is one of my saboteurs. But the other thing is that we tend to mirror each other. And whether it's Mr. Rogers saying, will you be my friend? You're more likely to respond warmly to that versus like I acted in Target the other day, which I'm not very proud of when I was checking out, but you go, okay, I could have done that better. And so going into conversation now, sometimes I can stop and say, okay, what do I want to do here? What, rather than just going in negatively or, judgmentally.
Yeah, and I think that's so critical, Barbara, because as we pattern our new realities, as we create new communities, and as I anticipate that community is going to be reclaimed as a really important aspect of our life. I think one of the things that's happened in the modern world is that community, the way you would see it, like with Indigenous people, I think has kind of lost its oomph. And yet human beings in the modern world you can see that we suffer from that lack of community. And so I think as we look to restore paradise on this planet and what is life enhancing and what's life giving, we're going to rediscover the need for and the power of community. And so the thing is that community, though, is made of a whole bunch of individual human beings, each being who they're being. And so as we look to build community, we need to be able to come into coherence with each other. I mean, to me, that's part of what community is there's a coherence, which does not mean that we're all necessarily the same or coming from the same angle or thinking the same thoughts or even having the same opinions about things, but that we have that we're all giving energy to a way of being with each other. And so that means then developing practically skills and abilities that allow us to have the kind of conversations that create the level of connection that we want, rather than I know lots of the disconnection that I've experienced in many places in my life and places that I've worked and places that I've volunteered, right? It's about being able to expand your skill set so that you can really have powerful connecting conversations.
When one of the things in this country too is you can do it yourself, so there tends to be that I don't need help, kind of thing. And this is kind of a silly example, but a cousin was getting married and I was asked to make 12 dozen cookies. Now in Pittsburgh, a cookie table at a wedding is a big deal. We all do it. Other people should take on that tradition because it's but I knew that I wasn't feeling well and that I wasn't up to doing that. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? Do I not do it? Do I tell her I'm not going to? And then I said, this is silly. So my sisters and I came over and we made the dough together. And then the next day, my girlfriend came over and we baked and decorated the cookies. And it was so much fun. It was a togetherness, and we all had fun. It wasn't I'm bad because I can't do this myself. It was a joy, actually. It was a joy.
Right. And to me, those simple joys are a powerful part of what it is to be human, right? I mean, I do think we crave those moments of connection with each other. We crave togetherness. Whether it's, being together in a common purpose of, providing this important part of this tradition to a wedding ceremony, or just hanging out and taking up space. I mean, my best friend from from college. I mean, we can talk for hours, days about nothing in particular. But it's one of our just favorite ways to be together. And that the joy and the nurture that comes from those experiences, I do think is part of what we are beginning to reclaim, and sort of insisting on reclaiming. I mean, I think for many of us, while I personally definitely appreciated the slowdown of COVID, and while it took me almost 2 years to get to a point of missing interaction, I did get to that point. And certainly what COVID did for me was shed a light on the level to which community did and did not exist for me and for a lot of other people. I mean, I think part of what it showed us was that our community was kind of fragile in a lot of ways, and that if we were going to move forward as a species, we were probably going to need to be more intentional about building quality community with each other.
Actually, Sandra told me to go out more. Before COVID, I used to go out to lunch multiple days a week with friends there, but obviously that went away with quarantining, and I'm starting back into that, and I really did miss it. That connection. It's not the same on Zoom. I'm sorry, it's just not.
Right. Yeah. I refer to Zoom as cauliflower pizza crust. it's better than nothing. But it allows us to be together, right? I mean, I'm in Florida, Barbara's in Pittsburgh, and so there certainly are things that are great about it, but it's to me, it's not meant to be the only way that we're together with each other. And I do think, again, that there's a need for us to rebirth genuine community that's supportive and life-giving. So, Barbara, anything else about Newfield or PQ just generally, before we dive a little bit more into our experiences with it?
The big thing they both emphasized was programming. We're living in all of these programs. Whether it's religious, society, culture, country, whatever, and we don't even look at them. Like, I know for me, Newfield talks about a master assessment. You don't even know it anymore because it's so common. And so like during that program, I could see, like, when I was 19, I had sex. I wasn't married and I felt very guilty. And, I had all this programming in there, the body's bad, the body's sinful, you have to be a virgin. And I, began withdrawing, scrunching, became anorexic actually, and went from about 125 to 92 pounds. Was not very healthy for the body. And, I stopped that, etc., and moved on. Like one day I decided I was going to change my life, and I did. But during the program, I became really aware of my master assessment that I can't be saved. Like, whatever that means. And one day, I was looking at some photos my sister brought over, and I get these daily email meditations. And then one day I was thinking about all of this, and I could hear Tina Turner in my head singing, "What's saved got to do with it?" What's saved but a secondhand emotion? And I just started laughing and dancing around and singing, and it went away. Like it was gone. It was acknowledged, it was accepted. I didn't need it anymore. That's powerful.
It is, and Barbara, you've written computer programming, right? So you know a lot about it. So just talk a little bit about, from that perspective, what's the purpose of a program and how does a program work?
It's to carry out a set of instructions, tasks in the same way each time. You may have a branch with, like if this happens, do this. If this happens, do B. If this happens, do C. So that's the whole point. But then I also, this is going back, my programming days are on mainframe computers. If a program stays in core memory, it doesn't get swapped out to the new program unless something forces it to. Mm-hmm. So it could be that it's not used anymore, so it gets swapped out and, then it allows the new version to come in, or you can force it to swap. So you could know a lot of this stuff. Okay, that doesn't make sense, etc. But it has to be in the core. It has to be in the core, not just here.
Yeah, I know for me, a big part of my core programming was self-sacrifice. And that, I only counted based on what I was doing for other people. Putting other people's needs and priorities ahead of my own. And for me, it was COVID that swapped out that core programming because I happened to find out during COVID that I had some health stuff going on. I was immunocompromised. I did not know that. Probably wouldn't have worried about it except that, oh my gosh, here we are in this global pandemic. And I had to make what to me often felt like selfish choices, to be safe, to work from my home, not in the office where my boss really wanted me to be. But it was the first time in my life that I'd ever been forced with thinking that my behavior might put my life at risk. I mean, I'd always given in a way that definitely created an balanced life for me, but never to the point of being physically in danger. And now here I was for the first time thinking I could, there's some things that indicate that if I were to get sick with COVID, it might be really bad for me. So I'm going to need to protect myself. And that was a really hard journey for me, harder than I even expected it might be. In fact, I'm an actor, and I wrote a whole one-woman show about it because it was such a journey for me of discovery. But I really do feel like, and thank goodness that at the same time, Newfield and PQ came into my world so that I feel like I've been able to be intentional about replacing it with programming that is more supportive. Because I'm still going to be somebody who gives. I mean, that is just, and I'm really only happy as a person when I'm, making a difference in my sight. And so what we're talking about is it's not that you're ever going to find yourself living absent of programming, right? Programming is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Every organization has it. Every religion has it. Families have it. It's everywhere. So it's not about eradication, but it is about recognition and being able to be at choice, right? So I have programming that serves me sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's a question, in any given moment, what's going to serve me, and recognizing that so much of my instinctive reaction, especially I feel like to problems or difficulties, that's when you really see your programming kick in, because it's that default, like Barbara's saying, it's in the core. And so it's just beginning to recognize, oh, well, gosh, defining myself as only, good if I'm giving to somebody else. Well, yeah, thank you very much, patriarchy. That is that is a core message for women, is that you only exist to serve others. So it's just recognizing that when I find myself thinking, well, I have to self-sacrifice. Well, do I really? Or is that programming that's trying to operate through me, and I can stop and say, I hear you, but I'm going to make a different choice. I'm going to make a choice to serve myself. I'm going to make a choice to find some sort of compromise where there's a balance between, my boss getting her needs met and me getting my needs met. But again, to me, it's all about being at choice, because that's where the power is.
It doesn't mean it's easy. That's for sure, for sure. But it's like, I know, like when I can say yes and I can feel it in the gut that the yes is accepted, then, and if it's not, then we may have to work on it some more or figure it out.
Right. And that's the thing. Life is life. We're all on a journey, right? But I think it's sort of reclaiming the ability to take it moment by moment. That's really challenging for me, because I'm 5 years down the road, I'm 10 years down the road. And so stopping and being in the moment and saying, what's the best choice in this moment, is a discipline I'm building, and probably will be working on that skill, that muscle, for the rest of my life in this go round. That's okay, because that's why we're here. We're here to learn and grow.
Yeah, sometimes it's like a loosening. Like you said, are you going to get judgy again? Yeah. Are you going to be in pleaser mode or perfectionist mode or whatever other mode? Yeah, you will. But you can become aware that that's where you want to stay. Because I think that choice, like I had, like certainty was really important for me because it was a place to hide and it was my safety. And there's a crack in that certainty now. The choice with, trying something riskier, or what I would consider risky, not necessarily. And that crack, there's a light in the crack. It's not dark and stormy.
So talk a bit more, Barbara, about what it's like for you to move with that.
So being able to say, well, whatever happens, happens. I don't have to plan everything out. I don't have to. It's like, so what? That's hard. That's hard for me, but now it's become a lot easier, I have to say. I don't know what I thought was in there, what that certainty would bring me: safety, being saved, security. I'd be okay. I wouldn't go to hell. Whatever all those things were in there, but they're not even in there. They're just programs and made up stuff that don't even, really mean anything. I'm not there. It's like even stupid stuff. Like, I want the light switches in a certain way in the kitchen. Nowhere else, just the kitchen. So I'll know I've made it when I don't care where the light switches are in the kitchen. But it's the choice. It's I had said this before about I do a lot of reading, and I do think the universe is talking to me more now than ever. And something will come up, and the PQ reading of the day, or in a meditation email I get, or a book, or a conversation, and it's pretty clear this is for me. And I had told you about this before, and actually on one of Tantra's thing, where the Bible quote, "Many are called, few are chosen." It's an exclusivity thing. What do I need to be in the exclusive club, or assuming I'm in the exclusive club, the rest of you are kind of crap. But a different translation interpretation is many are called, actually all are called. And that you choose if you want to be chosen.
Mm.
So if I walk into a situation and say, that's a whole, there's no exclusivity. It's complete community, it's complete one, it's complete togetherness all the time. Do I live like that all the time? No. But I can, sometimes just reading something with an emphasis on a different word could change the whole thing.
Mm.
Music. And like I said, we had Tina singing to me, and maybe others, a song on the radio, song while you're in the grocery store, whatever. So all of these put little cracks in there, that maybe that tightness, because my body's been tight most of my life. So it's time to let that tightness release and just allow little spaces in there. Let it flow rather than continue. It's kind of like if I unscrunch a little, okay, where are we? And if I unscrunch a little more, the world hasn't fallen apart. I haven't fallen apart. Actually, I'm happier. But it's still that trust.
Right.
Maybe I'll, get to the point where it all goes at one time. I don't know, but it's okay either way.
Yeah, I like the loosening and the flexibility. And I think about a tree, swaying in the wind, right? Those younger trees that are more flexible, they don't get toppled in the storm. And we've been through some stormy years. I think we probably still have some storm ahead of us. And so I do think it is those of us who develop flexibility that are going to have an easier time making it to the other side. And easier, again, not to mean easy. I mean, that's, Barbara and I could both talk about some pretty, profound, harsh, snap you in the face moments that we've had both in Newfield and PQ. But again, it's just the idea of sort of revealing, and just knowing what's running you at any given moment, again, so that you can be at choice about whether or not you want to continue to be moved by that or come from another place.
And this, I told you, that I was anorexic. I graduated from high school. I started working, and after a while, and I decided I had to change my life, so I quit my job. I went to college and started as a dietetics major, and I worked as a dietetics. A student dietitian one summer. I absolutely hated it, and that wasn't going to be my life. And so switched to accounting, and then a professor said to me, I had to take a computer class just as part of the business school. And a professor said to me, what's your major? And I said, I better play this safe. And I said, dietetics. He goes, you're in the wrong major. You need to be a systems major. Come and see me. So I did. And we talked, and he said, here are the classes you need to take, and wrote them all out. And Then when I was up visiting I was on an internship for that. Internship went great because I loved it. And I'm visiting my boyfriend, went to see him, and he called the company I worked for and said, Bill, I have this girl I think you should hire. And so I went and interviewed, and that's the job I took. It changed everything. Kind of like I had one life and then this was another life, and now I'm retired. It's really kind of a different life. But I knew that somehow, even though I had all this fear and scrunching in, I knew the universe was on my side. Because I've had some amazing opportunities. Like I lived in Europe, and I worked at our plants, a couple of plants. I loved it there. I loved it. The people kind of thought I was crazy, but I liked it. All that mattered.
Barbara, what was it like for you to feel either in your body or your emotion that you had kind of found home, that as you transitioned into this new major, that it was the right place for you? How did you know?
It felt exciting. It felt open. It was a very good student. Of course, I was 5 years older than most undergraduates. And so that put me in, I found everything fascinating. Like when I started, everything was fascinating. No matter what class I took, it was fascinating. And that, I think, helped me a lot, because I was, at least in that area, in the mind and in the brain and in the learning and, I was very open. Relationships might not have been so good, but that whole world and experience was great. And once I started into the programming arena, I was a natural at it, actually, because I was born that way. Like my mother, like I said, why do you have to be so technical? Why do you have to be so logical? And one thing you need for programming is both of those things. So I felt accepted, qualified in that arena. I belonged there. And there were a lot of, young people at the company, because, there were some older people than me at that time, who were there, who were in that profession, but most everybody was young, and, we had a good time. And I made lifelong friends from that.
Yeah, so to me, those are markers, joy and excitement and feeling free. Those are markers that are important to pay attention to. I didn't switch my major in college, but I picked up a second major. I was getting a degree in biology, and sort of realized about halfway through that I wasn't really cut out to be the research scientist that I thought I was going to be. I wasn't cut out to live life behind a microscope. And my father was a career educator, and I had done some things when I was younger, like taught guitar lessons and things like that. And so I decided to check out in education classes, and the 15 minutes into my first education class, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. Yeah. This feels right. And I've done 30 years, and now I'm transitioning out of that for the first time in my life. But because I'm pulled to another, so I've been an actor for 40 years. And I sort of always had this idea in the back of my mind that I might do a one-woman show at some point. And I had done that twice, but they were written by other people. But through a various synchronicity of events, I found myself writing and performing a one-woman show. And it was the first time in years that I had felt that level of excitement and energy. And I stumbled upon this awesome coach and teacher, and I just found myself hungry to just learn every little thing. It was like you saying, Barbara, it was fascinating. Just everything was, and I didn't have to put effort into it because I wanted to spend every free moment that I had working on this. And so I think it's important to pay attention to when we feel that, when we feel in the flow. Because I think, again, part of the programming of our modern society is that no pain, no gain mentality, right? And this idea of, yeah, for sure, as opposed to ease and flow.
I hadn't thought about it that way. That's great. Because even now talking about that, like being there and just being so fascinated and, I feel that like I felt it then, this excitement and this freedom and bring it, it's still there.
And for me, that was why I decided to actually go into the Newfield program. I mean, Tantra had introduced me to it and said, I think you should think about this. And I often joke that there's only one person in the world who's allowed to tell me what to do, and that's Tantra. Nobody else has that privilege. Just ask my partner or my parents. But so I did a 1 hour exploratory call, and the man named Julio, who sort of runs the network, just listening to him, I could feel my cells just drinking it in. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is the quality of conversation I've been aching to have for decades. And so again, your body has things to say to you. Your emotions have things to say to you. They're an important part of your full human experience. So, don't do all your decision making from here. Make sure your body and your emotions are part of that process. And that's actually a good thing, and not, as we've been programmed to think, a bad thing.
It's because I found, and I think I mentioned this before, that just accepting that I feel this way, sometimes that's all the body is asking.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel sad. Last night I felt sad. Don't ask me why I decided to start watching The Green Mile.
Oh,
and and I turned it on, and they're polishing the electric chair, and I'm like, I don't think I should watch this, but I watched it for a little longer and then turned it off. And I was like, so I felt this just sadness take over. But I could acknowledge that I felt that sadness and that horror, that these things were happening.
so how did that make the experience of being sad different for you?
I didn't push it away or hide it. I let myself feel sad. And this morning, breakfast, I read the news. Sometimes I'll read those little news things, like on your phone. And there was one that showed up, which said, this person survived a lethal injection. And I went, oh crap. I didn't read it. It wasn't breakfast reading material. And, but I'm like, well, I guess something's up for me about this. I'm going to have to look at it. I would like to run away from it.
Do you feel like?
But I started, like last night, I started doing my PQ reps and so PQ reps are little exercises that you can do to calm, to bring you back into your wise part. So the saboteurs that he talks about it's a certain part of the brain, and then your wise areas are in a different different part of the brain. But so like last night, I'm doing PQ rows, so I'm sitting there watching this, and then decided if I could skip to the end, it would be okay, but I just wasn't ready for that at that moment. And that's okay too. You don't have to stick something out if it's not the right thing, if it's not serving you at that moment. And I think that's the service word. Is it serving? Is it serving?
Yeah, you personally, right? I mean, that's,
Yes.
and
Is it serving me? Because I am a pleaser and always have been, like you talked about being it's the self-sacrificing, what does my mother need? What does this person need? What does that person need? And so my needs don't become important. But they are important. And I don't have to read that article if I don't want to. But it's just very weird that in 12 hours, it's come up, the death penalty has come up twice.
Yeah, and so to me so what we're talking about, with the PQ work and the new field work, and I mean, and really a lot of the work that's going on in the world right now about helping human beings sort of get, recentered in themselves is again to be a choice. So yeah, so something has come into your consciousness, and then you're asking yourself, is this mine to do?
Mm-hmm. Is it mine to do?
And maybe the answer is yes, and maybe the answer is no. And maybe the answer is yes, but not right now, or not.
Or look into it and then make a decision.
Right. But that allows us to again, to come from a place of choice rather than being at the effect of something. That was, that's a discipline that I've had to really work on for myself. So I was raised by a history teacher, so
yeah,
reading the newspaper and staying up on the news. And I lived most of my life in Washington, D.C., where local news was national news, international news, so, but, especially in these last 5 years, there's been times when I've had to just back away because it's okay, this, the overload is becoming toxic, and I need to step back, I need a break, I need a timeout. To get recentered and regrounded. And then, when I feel more centered and grounded, then I'll look at what I want to move with next. But it's that whole idea of putting on your own oxygen mask before assisting other passengers, right? And
yes, definitely.
And a lot of us have been programmed to do it the other way around.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately we can give the most when we're grounded in ourselves.
Yes. Grounded in PQ parlance and stable in Newfield.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, some humor helps. Like today's PQ, there's a 2-minute thing at the beginning of the day to read, and they were talking about exaggerating what you're feeling, like take it to the ridiculous. Sometimes that can make you go, oh, really, where am I going with this? But I was reading somebody's comments, and I really like this term, judgy McJudgy pants. I may adopt that, where, well, judgy McJudgy pants,
Mm-hmm.
There's lots, it doesn't all have to be serious either.
Right. Which is another thing that I really appreciate about Newfield is they talk about lightness, and really, and being in the lightness of being rather than the heaviness of being. And that was a really important message for me, because when I came into the Newfield program, I was deep into the heavy, everything was so important. Everything mattered so much. Everything was a make or break, life or death. Our bodies are not designed to live with that level of stress, right? That's, that level of stress is what starts to cause problems. And right now, more and more research is pointing to stress as a driver of so many different types of diseases. So, so what's the opposite of that? Well, the opposite of that is being in that lightness and that flow, which is where I think getting to know your body is really important, because your body is often the one that will tell you
Yes.
where you are.
And I get into guilt about that, but sometimes you get into a circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's my fault.
Guilt,
Doesn't-
is a major player in
Right.
your religious programming. Yes.
Guilt and doubt are both of them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, the universe is talking to me a lot lately. And so, like even the difference between moralism and morality. Moralism is the program, the external, you need to be a certain way. Morality maybe something very different. So like thou shalt not kill. That's maybe something you want to keep. Or be truthful with yourself.
Yeah, and so that's interesting, Barbara, because it's making me think of so if we work on revealing our programming and sort of being more at choice about whether or not we're being driven by a program, and to me, sort of on the other end of the spectrum is the conscious creation of a code, your own code for your own life, because I do think as humans we aren't designed to just go around like this. Like if you take a blown up balloon and let the air out and it goes zooming all over with no particular guidance or direction or whatever. I don't think we're not designed to flail, right? We don't thrive when we're flailing. So it's a question of, saying, okay, well, what do I want to be the central tenets of my existence here? What matters to me? Where do I want to put a stake in the ground?
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's back, it's the choice. It's so easy to get caught up in, you want to keep this image of yourself as perfect or pleasing or, whatever, innocent or whatever, all of those. But that's not life. And what is a body anyway?
Right. And that, I think, was one of the things that I was really confronted with during COVID, was when, sort of as I was, doing some analysis of myself and realizing how much time I spent, analyzing my life in comparison to other people my age, blah, 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 and realizing that I did the comparison. Okay, I got information, but it wasn't useful information, right? Saying, well, this person's here and that person's there. That did not inspire me to make change or do things differently. It just made me feel bad. And so recognizing that, that there is something called analysis paralysis. And
oh yes, I've been there many a time.
Mm-hmm. And so, comparison isn't always helpful. Judgment, I mean, Shirzad from Positive Intelligence would probably tell you that judgment's rarely helpful. Because that's different than discernment, right? Discernment is me realizing, oh, that, traveling for work and living out of a suitcase was not great for me physically. As opposed to, saying, oh, well, if I was tougher, then I could handle this, right? That's judgment. So there's also a lot of, I think in both Newfield and PQ, while Newfield doesn't necessarily use a specific language, they definitely emphasize this idea of judgment versus discernment.
Yes. Yes. And not, other people don't have all the right answers. Nothing would change if everybody followed everybody else all the time.
Right. Right, because that's not where discovery comes from. That's not where innovation comes from. It's not where joy comes from.
Right.
And I think one of the gifts of being a human being is having the freedom to choose.
Yes. Whether you exercise it or not, it's up to you. And that's huge. If you can take it in.
And again, I feel like you have to take it in moment by moment by moment, right?
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like I said,
knowing that you're going to screw it up.
I wasn't taking it in. I thought, like I said, at Target the other day. So, but awareness, that awareness, and, you know, so if you can intercept it in the moment, that's great. But it may take 150 times before you're able to do that. Okay.
Right. And being gentle with yourself in your learning.
Yeah, that's been a tough one for me. But that's improved a lot since these two programs. I mean, I think it's lessened over the years, but these have made a huge difference. Be grounded, you know, being grounded, being in the heart, just being in the heart.
Yeah, and I do want to just mention briefly that it, you know, for those folks that might have some interest, so there's Shirzad's written a book called Positive Intelligence that you can get it on Kindle. Lots of places you can access the book. He has a website. There's a lot of free resources and materials on there. It's positiveintelligence.com. Newfield Network, if you go out on YouTube, there's lots of videos and things out there that you can find, and you can just enjoy. For me, it's bathing in the energy of the wisdom that they have. So there's lots of ways to interact without necessarily, you know, jumping into a full-blown program. But if you're curious, you can find a lot of stuff out on the web.
You know, one of the things that Newfield really is the question. What is the question? You know, like the whole Holy Grail thing, that it was really more about the question than the answers. You have to find the right question. And this really helped me with the questions and being okay with questions and not everything having to have an answer.
As a teacher, I remember reading a piece of research that was saying one of the most powerful ways to get a sense of a student's understanding is to ask them to create a question rather than to give you an answer, because the level of the question, the expanse of the question, would do a better job of showing you, the teacher, what the student was grasping and what they were not grasping. Yeah, exactly. And also that when you're having learning conversations, that when you ask a question, you're sort of programmed to find an answer. So, you know, there's a way in which it can perhaps narrow down the conversation rather than saying, well, what's a question you might ask about this, which tends to open things up a little bit.
That's really fascinating. have
So we're
pause
coming to
that.
the top of the hour. Barbara, I want to thank you so much for being in this fabulous conversation with me. I feel like we could talk another 4 hours, easy. But it's
I
been great
totally
to have
enjoyed
you.
it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we look forward to seeing you back with us in 2023. Happiest of New Year's for those of you who are celebrating that on December 31st.